confined areas? Yeah, no problem. Another team's in Georgia at the moment? Cool. If they can get the pilot here, we can get the training done. No problem. Cool. Catch you later. Hey guys, we got some training on confined areas.
Shrine dedicated to the prince of the last of your 9 lives. She waited in the darkest corner all night until I closed up shop. I turned out the lights. Then she begged for me to drive her home. I thought about the Kensington Stranglers. I was about to say no. I said, no need, get out, take your purse. Young lady, oh, scared. Young lady, oh, scared. Remember that time you wrote me 200 letters, never once to a single reply.
Gremlin, this is Aussie 522130, over.
Aussie 522, this is Gremlin. Have you 555? Go ahead, check it over.
Gremlin, Aussie 522, 1YC130, Juliet Mike B, inbound at low level, ETA 4 mics, over.
Aussie 522, Gremlin, wind is light and variable. Nil cloud, surface dry, LC clear, marked as Burris pins, brother.
Gremlin, Aussie 522, good copy, out.
sure know how to make an entrance, I'll give you that. I'm Wolf. Nice to meet you.
Yeah, hi, Wolf.
If we can, we'll get Blue to show you where to drop your kit, and we'll crack on with the brief. Good with that?
Yeah.
Not too tired?
No, put good.
All right. Go on. See you shortly. All right, mate. It's a beautiful day, and it's only you and I, so I figure we might as well brief outside. So pull up a pew, and we can go through a brief for what we're going to do this afternoon.
Yeah, no worries, Wolf.
Okay, so here we're going to have a look at confined areas. Now, confined areas, for a start, you define exactly what we're talking about with confined area and how we're going to operate it into today. So, confined area, as a definition, would be somewhere that you can't conduct a normal approach to, a normal 3-degree approach path into an area unrestricted. So one of the first things you've got to ask yourself is, if you're going to go and fly a confined area, is there an alternative? Because there's obviously an increase in risk in terms of flying a confined area, and maybe the best thing that you can do is shift whatever it is you're going to pick up or drop off to an area where a confined area and the risks associated with it are not required. So if I give you a scenario for the scope of what we're going to deal with while you're here, then given enough power and directed to an LZ, so we're not talking about your performance planning, we're going to conduct a confined area approach utilizing appropriate TTPs, that's tactics, techniques, procedures, for a crew con, a ground party con, or a solo entry into a touchdown, lift, and departure. Now, to that end, there's really two things that you're interested in more than anything else. Number one, are you going to have the power in order to get in, get out of that confined area safely? So you've got to make sure those power calculations are clear. And we'll break these down more shortly. Second of all, you want to make sure you're not going to hit anything. That's the thing that's first and foremost on most people's minds. So between those two, what can we end up doing to prepare ourselves for going into a confined area and coming out safely? Break it down into 4 phases. First of all, there's going to be a preparation and planning phase. Now, sometimes that can be research in terms of using Google Earth and photos. In fact, in Vietnam, the guys who are working with MACV SOG, with Hueys, they would go out into an area. Usually the forward aircraft controllers would go and do the research. They were a call sign Covey. They would have a Covey rider. Now, Covey rider was one of the guys from the SOG group that would end up sitting in the back and analyzing different areas that may be possible as LZs. So you can certainly do an airborne reconnaissance. Airborne reconnaissance from that point of view is going to determine if that LZ is going to be large enough to take everybody in one go, or you're going to take 2 helicopters and try and put them through in 3 different cycles to try and get the number of people into that LZ that's required. So looking at the size of the LZ and trying to work out what the hazards are before you get there. So you can do that research before you go in. In most circumstances, if it's non-military, you're going to want to do some research in advance, but you're going to do quite a thorough recce when you get to that LZ to work out whether it's going to be safe or not and what your considerations are. Other things you can do in the preparation and planning comes down to even preparation of the airframe. Now, we've got the Huey here at the moment. We've taken the IR diffuser exhaust tip off it. That IR diffuser exhaust tip, I'll show you a picture of it here. It actually deflects the hot air upwards through the main rotor system, and that reduces the heat signature of the helicopter. When you've got threats in the area, they're going to end up using man pads or similar missiles that are going to zero in on your heat signature. So reducing that heat signature actually reduces the target size of your particular airframe to that missile system. What it does for us from a performance point of view, though, is not terrific. It's not a huge impact, but once you fit that exhaust, you're now restricting the outflow from the engine. When you restrict the outflow, you'll see an increase in temperature for the given power that you have. So fitting that tip will reduce our max available power by 1 psi. So it is significant. Helicopters are always working in that final band of performance. The other thing it does is it deflects the airflow upwards. And in deflecting the airflow upwards, there is still some jet thrust that comes out of that engine. So you're now forcing air upwards by the way of thrust, that's effectively increasing the weight because you're pushing the helicopter down more. You need to counter that in terms of what the helicopter is going to do with its own performance as well. So if we had that IR diffuser filtered, then, or fitted rather, we would end up losing 1 PSI off the horsepower available, but we also end up losing another 140 pounds on top of that in terms of uplift because of that upward vector of thrust. So there are considerations that will be type specific for different helicopter types. Now, your preparation and planning, therefore, logistics is going to come into it as well. How much weight are you going to take in? How high is it? Your performance is going to be a factor in all of this as well. Performance is a big area. It's deserving of its own brief, and we'll go into that. And we'll touch on some of the rules of thumb they end up using for performance on the Huey in the meantime. And by rules of thumb, it means little tips that we've worked out, ways of dead reckoning performance of the aircraft based on what's in the aircraft flight manual, the AFM or the POH, the pilot operating handbook, the -10 if you're with the Army. So if you go into those performance tables, you can work out how much is a temperature variation going to affect us, all the things that affect us from an environmental point of view. Okay, the things that are going to affect your performance more than anything else are heat, height, humidity. The one that we have control over is weight. So there's 4 factors now that we have to take into account. So if we start off with the basic, the fundamental key element of 32 to 8.5, so 32 degrees, 2,000 feet, 8,500 pounds, we can make adjustments to that based on what we see on the day. The classic example of that might be a temperature variation. I use temperature because it's got the largest effect. So if you end up taking a group of people into a hilltop to deposit them into a confined area similar to what we have here at the moment, and you do that at 7 or 8 o'clock in the morning, you may find the weight that you put on the helicopter taking those people in there took you to OGE plus 0. You're right on the limit of your OGE power. You could just manage to get them safely into that confined area. Leaving's easy because you're light. Now you need to come back and it's around midday. And let's say it's 10 degrees warmer. 10 degrees is going to cost you another 5 PSI of power that you don't have. Now you can only just come in and perform a landing if you have power in ground effect. So you have to find some alternative location to pick people up based on the approach and being able to terminate in ground effect before you bring the aircraft down to settle. Getting in won't be a problem. And the one thing that, one of the things that helicopters and fixed wing have in common, you can always get yourself into an area, land a helicopter or land an aircraft in an area that you don't have the performance to get back out of. It's the way it works. It takes less to get in than it does to get out. For the Huey, there's about 5 to 6 PSI difference between what you're going to use in ground effect and what's required for out of ground effect. I say 5 to 6 because it's usually 5 PSI. If you're really heavy, there's going to be a 6 PSI difference. So if we take those rules of thumb, then we can adjust our performance as required. So that's part of our preparation and planning before we go anywhere near a confined area in the first place. It's like phase 1. Let's go phase 2. You've now arrived at the confined area and you need to review what you're up against. If it's a large confined area, you can do a nice wide orbit, sufficient altitude that you don't have to be overly concerned with striking any kind of obstruction around the area. You want to be concentrating more on being able to look into that confined area. Are you always going to do that? No. If it's a tactical environment, you're not going to be doing orbits of the area before you go in. But if it's not a tactical environment, you're running it more from a civvy point of view or HEMS, like Helicopter Emergency Services, you want to be careful about analysing that confined area. For me, usually in the Huey, it's more comfortable to make left-hand orbits. Left-hand orbits meaning because, as we'll talk about a little bit more later, the A pillar in the Huey is right there. And it's harder to see out that side. But if you look out to the left-hand side, then you can get a full view across the LZ, and you just want to be looking down into the far edges of that LZ or pickup zone. So LZ landing zone and PZ for a pickup zone. The speed is going to be as required. It's going to depend on the size of the LZ itself. Now, some people will talk about doing a high recce and then doing a low recce. The purpose of the high recce is really just to make sure there's nothing you're going to hit while you're doing the low recce. So if, for example, you've got high tensile power lines or something along those lines, maybe some masts or something that's going to form a problem for you performing the low recce, you want to identify that before you get down and do the low recce. The low recce follows a fairly specific acronym, if you like. Now, it doesn't matter what acronym you use. Most people teach different things. I've seen a lot of different things on the internet that people are using at the moment. But what I was taught is fairly thorough, and it does work to a large extent for fixed wing and rotary wing. It's PSWATPs. We'll talk about that in the aircraft as well. It's important to understand that procedure or that process to go through and review where it is you want to go and land. So PSWATPs, what does that stand for? Well, it's power, a power check, first of all, just to make sure you've got enough power to go in. That's really important from the helicopter's point of view, I've mentioned before. Then you've got S, size, shape, surface, slope, sun, and surrounds. All considerations. Size and shape, sure, is it big enough? And shape might give you an access that you can approach more comfortably. If it's very long but quite narrow, then it's going to give a natural access way to come through. Surface is going to give you some indications in terms of what to expect and what you might want to avoid. Surface are things like sand or snow, blowing snow. If there's water in an area, if it looks like it's boggy in one place, you don't want to be settling down there if you can avoid that. Slope is obviously a factor, and slope, if the slope looks like it's excessive, you may not be able to plan to settle the aircraft down completely or settle the helicopter down completely. Some effective ways of assessing that slope when you come in. We'll talk about those in the helicopter when we get in there. Sun, obviously if you can avoid running into the sun, you don't want sunstrike. If you can avoid that, you will. It may be determined by other factors, but it's just another consideration. And surrounds. Now surrounds means the surrounds inside that landing zone itself, and you're making a distinction now between what you might encounter in the bush and what you might encounter if you're going to a more urban area. The more urban areas, the more human presence there is, the more dangerous it gets, to be honest. If you're going into the bush, you pretty much know what's there. There shouldn't be any surprises. If there are people around you, you'd want to be looking like if you're going to go and support someone, make sure they haven't strung up a clothesline or a radio antenna or anything across the LZ. But if you go into an urban area, there is so much more that can catch you out. For example, loose sheets of corrugated iron creating an issue, a safety hazard for anyone on the ground. Anything you can pick up that will end up coming up into the main rotor or the tail rotor system becomes a threat to you, it becomes a threat to personnel on the ground. You're also more likely to encounter wires being strung across. There are going to be a lot more hazards. Urban environment, you start talking about things like recirculation as well. If you're getting down amongst buildings, you're not going to have as much power available if you start ingesting your own vortices. So power, size, shape, surface, slope, sun, surrounds. W, wind, and wires. Wind's always a factor. Wind can be useful to us as well. If you have the wind coming from the power pedal side and the HUI, the pedal that you apply when you're increasing power with the collective is the left pedal, so the left pedal is the power pedal. If you have wind coming from your left-hand side as you come into that LZ, that actually offloads what you need on the tail rotor. That's absorbing power from the engine and gives you a little bit more to the main rotor. Wires are always an issue. So if you're doing a recce going into an area, if it's a photographic or a map recce, obviously you want to try and make sure there's no wires marked on the map or nothing in photos. You're going to look for poles rather than wires because the poles will be a better indicator to then start looking more closely for wires. But from my point of view, no matter what size the LZ is, doing at least 2 orbits of that LZ before you go in for a landing is a really good idea. The reason I say that is because you've got 2 chances in that complete orbit that you'll get the light actually glinting off a wire or some sort of obstacle inside that LZ that will ping you to its presence before you get in there. As you get tighter and tighter with the LZs, they're smaller, you're going to be practically hovering around the edge of a bolt hole. And when you're doing that, particularly if you're solo, you don't have the benefit of a crew conning from the back seat or someone conning from the ground on a radio to give you a heads up of obstacles and so on. That orbit a couple of orbits at least, maybe 3, maybe 4, until you're comfortable. What you're really doing is performing the role of a human photogrammetry machine. So you're trying to build up a 3D image of what that LZ looks like, plan your approach, and as you go into it, you need to have a mental idea of exactly where the helicopter is going to slot into it, and particularly your tail rotor. Obviously, we want to try and keep a large bubble around the tail rotor. Try and think of it as having a 10-foot broomstick out the back of your head with the most tender part of your body sitting on the back there. And if you keep it in mind from that point of view, it sounds a little bit strange, but if you keep it in mind from that point of view, then you need to be 100% aware at all times of where your tail rotor is, whether you're turning around the nose, turning around the tail, turning around the mast, as you go into that zone. So, power, size, shape, surface, slope, sun, surrounds, wind, wires, approach. You're going to plan your approach based on the criteria you've looked at so far. Your approach will be, hopefully, the lowest possible angle you can get in. That might be a single steep angle approach. It might be a double angle approach where you come in on one angle and then increase your descent rate. Or it might be to the point where it is outright vertical as a vertical approach coming in. How challenging that gets depends on what you have working for you. If you're solo, that's going to be the most restrictive because you've got the least amount of situational awareness, so you have to be very, very careful. Therefore, the size of the LZ you go into solo is going to be larger than the size of the LZ, certainly, that you go into if you have a crew, 1 or 2 crewmen observing from the side and taking the con to give you directions to move you down into that LZ, which can be enormously rewarding as well. We have power, size, shape, surface, slope, sun, surround, wind, wires, approach, terrain. So what's the terrain in the general area? That's going to dictate also what your egress is going to be. And takeoff. Are you going to have enough performance for the takeoff once you get out? How are you going to take off? Where are you going to head to, given the terrain you've looked at already as well? So there's a number of factors. Finally, P, plan. If you're operating with a crew, you need to look at all those factors and then come up with a plan and communicate the plan with the crew. Once that plan is communicated, you do not change the plan on the fly, so to speak. You continue to apply that plan. If there's any variation, you communicate that, and if the variation is significant enough, which you have to be the judge of, then pull out, make your orbits again, and re-establish a new plan. Factor in those new elements. All right, so PSWATP sounds like a lot, and you're probably thinking, hey, it's going to take me 30 minutes of orbiting this LZ in order to conduct all these checks. Surely that's not what people do. What you're really aiming for is to conduct 2 orbits of the LZ initially, run through these factors, because they're things that should be forefront in your mind. If you go into it with more experience and you've done this step by step from the initial point of view as you learn it, ab initio for confined areas, these considerations at least are in your mind for going and landing the helicopter anywhere that is not at an airfield or somewhere that's prepared specifically for helicopter ops like the deck on a ship. That's why I find them really useful as well. So there are plenty of occasions that helicopters are going to go and land in other areas, and it doesn't have to be a confined area before these considerations are worthwhile as well. So in terms of phases, we looked at the preparation and planning phase. Now we've had a look at what you're going to do to analyze this LZ and come up with a plan. How about flying into the LZ itself? Well, first thing we want to do is set up with a short circuit. Now, when I say a short circuit, it means a circuit that is relatively tight. If you get too wide, you're going to lose sight of the LZ itself. And if you get too close, you're not really performing a circuit anymore. You're not setting yourself up. You're going to be slowing down, getting the doors open for the crewmen if you have an airborne con, for them to take the con as they get in over the top of the LZ. So common areas you see are exactly that. People getting too wide on the circuit and losing contact with the LZ, or people getting too close to the LZ and then you're not really setting yourself up for a reasonable approach, cramping themselves. One consideration with all of this as you set yourself up going into the LZ is your orientation. So you set up the circuit, they'll have the approach path you've talked about, but think about what you're going to do on the ground as well, because if, for example, there is somewhere on the ground, like a victim, you're going to go and rescue somebody, there's an injured hiker, for example, make sure that you have a concept of what bearing that individual is for the ground. ground party, once you hit the LZ, to track direct to where that injured party is. I made that mistake once before with the Navy. We were doing a search and rescue exercise, and I had an instructor with me, Crappers, at the time. Did this really nice setup, approach, came into the confined area, really happy with how that went. Wound down to idle, and the instructor leaned over and said, "Cool, now what direction are we sending the ground party out to get to that victim?" And trust me, it looks super different on the ground. When you're sitting on the ground, you're looking around, you lose your bearings. I couldn't begin to tell you exactly what direction the ground party should set off through the bush to try and find this victim that was really easy to see from the air. So another factor, as you're setting yourself up to come into the LZ, if there's somewhere that you or a member of your team needs to track to once you get on the ground, try and establish that bearing. Just use the helicopter compass as a hand bearing compass. Get a bearing to pass on to the ground party once they hit the ground. So, set ourselves up on final. There's a couple of things we need to keep in mind for the approach itself. First of all, you're going to have to relax. Now, I know that sounds crazy, but if you are running into the LZ, most of the people will end up choking up on the stick. They'll end up becoming tight, so you need to be conscious of actually wriggling your toes at least and taking a really light grip on the stick. Concentrating on the attitude of the helicopter makes a big difference, but the biggest consideration going into an LZ is realistically down to where you're looking, how you're looking, how long you're looking, what you're looking for. You're trying to maintain references, and those references end up being what you can see in front and what you can see to the side. In front is going to tell you if you're moving left or right, and to the side is going to tell you if you're moving forwards or backwards or coming vertically straight down. Again, that A pillar I talked about on the right-hand seat, when you're looking out at this side, a lot of your viewers instructed. You can see, but you're going to have to come back and turn your head. You really want to avoid turning your head as much as possible. It's very hard to turn your head without influencing your control over the stick. A helicopter, fixed wings the same, they'll tend to go where you look. If you move your head around too much, then the helicopter's going to follow your head movement as well, and you'll start getting into squabbles. It also becomes disorienting as you move your head around in that environment. One of the better things to do is look across. What I'll end up doing is looking left, about 45 degrees left. If I look at that point, then I can use my eyes, I can track forward, I can see if I'm coming down vertically, or if I need to move to the side, I can get a gauge of exactly what that is. At the same time, I can use my eyes and see what my fore-aft movement's doing. So looking forward 45 gives me this nice window of visibility, gives me plenty of control, and I can use my eyes to maintain the position instead. As you descend, some will be tempted to rush. They'll try and plummet down to get the helicopter on the ground as soon as possible, because that's the point where they're going to feel comfortable. Really important not to do that, not just because of issues like vortex ring, but you need to be able to pause the helicopter and hover at any time, reassess where you're at, and have that ability, ideally, to come back out of the LZ if you have to. Let's see. As you're tracking those points on the way down, you need to go from hover point to hover point. Now, hover point to hover point is going to involve lining up points in the foreground with points behind. So as you come down, you should be ready to stabilize, come down, stabilize, come down, stabilize. It's not necessarily a constant descent. If you're comfortable with doing that, then by all means. But as you come down in that descent, if it's constant, you'll tend to go too quickly. So whatever you think is a good descent rate, halve it, and you should be pretty close. If you do get the wobbles, and people will, you'll get into a point where suddenly you'll start getting into PIOs or over-controlling. Don't try and fix it in terms of where you're going to. Stop the descent, stabilize where you are. Once you're stable, reinitiate that descent step by step. Excuse me, as you come down. Alrighty, and once you get down to the surface area itself, now you're going to be having a closer look. Make sure that where your footprint is, whether it's skids or wheels on the helicopter, obviously skids for the Huey, you're going to end up positioning yourself to give yourself the best advantage in terms of where you're going to touch down. Some people like to wiggle the cyclic when they touch down. I prefer not to do that. If it was a very stony area, for example, and if felt like the helicopter was unbalanced, then you may feel that with a little bit of movement, but gentle movement. You see too often as people sit down and they go, oh yeah, we'll just see if we're stuck. You don't want to do that. You want to be really gentle. What you're looking for to see if a skid is resting on something that's going to be unbalanced. Particularly important if you're going to shut down, because you don't want the helicopter to get unbalanced and go into ground resonance. You don't want it to slip sideways. But there can be risks if you just rotate the stick like that as well. It is possible for the skids to move. If they move, they could move and snug underneath something that's an obstacle you haven't seen. When you go to lift out again, it can end up creating a dynamic rollover situation where one skid's caught on one side. So you have to be wary of doing that as well. So personally, if it isn't a stony environment, like a solid rock that you're landing on, or large stones in a creek or something like that, I would tend not to move the stick around and stir the pot, so to speak, prior to shutting down the helicopter, if that's what you're going to do. So once you're in and you're stable on the LZ, the next thing is to come back out again. If you were smart and you were going to a slope landing, you would have taken a note of exactly what your hover attitude was. This is assuming you're coming out at the same weight, same CFG position. Remember, in the helicopters have not just 4R CFG like fixed wing do, but they also have lateral CFG limits. Depending how you load it, you may find if you've taken on a bunch of people or a cargo load, for example, it's not going to necessarily maintain exactly the same hover attitude when you pick up. So you have to be ready for that. But if you're coming out the same way as you went in, you hopefully will have noticed and noted what your hover attitude was and where your collective was. In doing that, that's what you want to come back to that hover attitude. So we're getting into realms of slope landing techniques and what you're looking for. We'll discuss that when we get out in the helicopter as well. We've done slope landings before, so we'll just revisit that. Once you get airborne, it's the reverse out of what it was in for the most part. However, there are situations where you might come in, and you'll see that in one of the LZs today as well. You might come in with a slot on a nice long LZ to put it down, but unless you maneuver within the LZ, you're going to be forced to conduct a towering departure, so straight up and out with a transition at the top. Maneuvering inside LZs causes more helicopter accidents than going in and out of the LZ in the first place. It's getting into an LZ and then trying to maneuver, making contact with the main rotor, or worse still, making contact with the tail rotor whilst you're trying to maneuver in that LZ. And this is assuming a solo situation, because if you have crew on board, like Bench and Muzz have as crewmen today, they can actually stick their head out the sliding doors and let you know exactly what's going on. They end up taking control. So a lot safer from that point of view. So today we will go into one LZ initially that is nice and long, get into it, and it will require a towering departure. When I say reverse of going in, there is a tendency again for people to lock up on the controls and try and race up out of that LZ. You don't want to do that. You want to come up progressively, the same sort of rate that you went in, ideally, because if something happens, you become aware of an overhang or some obstruction. You want to be able to comfortably pause that ascent so that you can reassess what's going on and adjust if necessary. Once you get up and above the treetop levels, you want to have sufficient height that you can then transition forwards, and that's where your planning came in before for a read of the terrain, what your escape vector is going to be, your escape path, and back up to translation. So that's what we're going to have a look at this afternoon. We're going to run through those elements. As I said, we're in a helicopter that, because of the performance today and the weight that we have on board, plus removing that IR diffuser, you're not going to be power limited. We'll consider power limitations later on, some different techniques. Also, the weather is fine and butte. We're looking at 29.92 or 1013 with pressure. There's no wind. Temperatures are very comfortable. It's 20-22 degrees. So we really are just talking about the techniques today. Any questions?
No, thanks.
Good. All right, crack on. Silent so that we can practice some elements of running as a solo crew, but they will have the doors open and there will be a second and third set of eyes for us as well to make sure we don't have any unnecessary risk during that mission. So for Met and NOTAMs, Met at the moment is all fine and beautiful. We're running about 20 degrees, the wind is light and variable, there's no forecast change for the next 3 hours. NOTAMs is nothing applicable either. And timings, we're on our way to the aircraft now, so it's pretty flexible as we go. So today the aim of the sortie that we're about to conduct is to look at confined areas. An introduction. Amateur-wise, we're definitely interested, obviously, in our checks, our limitations, and also in a good lookout, even though we're not expecting other people around. We need to make sure we don't pop up into anyone that's in one area today. Considerations will be PSWATPs and getting those into the bloodstream so they become more like second nature, and secondary to that, getting into where to look and how to look from the hands and feet point of view as we get into tighter and tighter CAs. Eric's, we're going out initially to a very large CA. We'll start big to small. Large CA, as we'll talk about in the area, probably won't need a PSWATP that you look at, but we'll conduct it in slow time. From there we move into a smaller LZ, LZ2, which is going to give us an axis and orientation, so it's long and narrow. Once we get into that LZ, we'll then do a tower incline out, we'll come back into the LZ, look at maneuvering within the LZ, we will maneuver to LZ3 from that position. We'll then do a ground con on LZ3, as if we're solo pilot again. We'll lift the weight out of there. At that point, we'll probably be looking at a top up of fuel. When we come back from the refuel, we'll be into LZ4, which will be a crew con to go down and pull a load out of that again. So we'll look at the performance elements of that. And then LZ5 we'll finish off with, and LZ5 has a few other elements that we can have a look at, particularly in terms of steep slope and inclined area and how we might do it more from a tactical point of view. Right, emergencies. Not planning any emergencies today, so there's no reason for me to go down that road. But from the point of view of real emergencies, if we have a real emergency, we will run through the DCS protocol for recognize, control, contain, establish safe flight, pause, then run through a diagnosis, analysis, and a decision as a crew to recover that airframe back to a safe location where possible. Fuel today, not planning joker fuels, not required. We're quite handy. We're starting with 400 pounds. Bingo will operate for 200 pounds at any one of the LZs. The risk mitigation side of things, or aviation risk management at least, we look at 4 elements: the aircraft, the crew, the mission, the environment. The aircraft itself is fine. There's no snags, no carrying forward unserviceabilities, nothing that's wrong with the aircraft. It's still safe to fly, but we'd otherwise limit our operation of that airframe. Crew, we're all good to go, so no one's tired, sick, or feeling like they're not up to the mission at all. The mission itself is not benign. We spent an awful lot of time in the avoid curve today with a single engine helicopter. If we have an engine failure, then it's going to hurt. That's probably the highest risk with what we're doing today. Second to that would be keeping an eye out, making sure we don't make contact with anything, but that's why we've got Pitch and Muzz helping us out at the back as well, just to make sure that doesn't happen. Environment, we talked about the weather, that's an element of environment, but also in traffic. We've got no friendly players out there today, so there's no one airborne that we have to concern ourselves with. Just maintaining a good lookout, good situational awareness on the way through. So that's the idea of the brief overall. We're about to rock up to the aircraft now. Thanks to Aussies driving, and we will crack on with the mission.
Alright, check. You hear me all right?
Yep, gotcha.
advised.
Alright, we got a GPU fired up here at the moment, so we'll get the power on from that, run through the checks, and get on our way.
Okay, blade is untied. Crew ready for start?
Ready, lift.
Ready, right?
Roger, on 5 seconds. Starting. Blade's turning. It's a good start. 40, release, 30 seconds. Inverter's on. Engine oil pressure checked. Alrighty, crew ready for lift.
Ready, lift. All clear, left to point.
Copy, ready, right? Clear, right.
And all clear, left and right, lifting. Controls good, ZFG's good. T's and P's are in the green and 6600 C9OS is clear, configuration's good. Okay, power in the hover is 26, that's what we were planning. Probably be about 29 or 30 in the hover outside of ground effect. We'll do a power check out of here just to show you how that works too. Okay, we're going to turn around the tail to the right, moving to the right, all clear.
Clear, right?
Copy. Moving. Now there are other helicopters as well that are using this particular pad, so keep a good eye out. But we'll stop and do a bit of a check. So tail's coming to the left, guys. And we're all clear. No one's coming in over the trees into the pad or anything before we launch out of here and end up creating problems. Righty. Pre-takeoff again, we are 6600. The sea fuel, T's and P's are in the green, CDOS is clear and configuration is fine. All set in the back. And truck coming through, noted. Rolling. We'll leave the doors back at the moment. Unless you guys get too cold in the back, let me know. Okay, clear right ahead, above, round to the left, turning left. LZ1, the first, is the largest of the LZs we're going into. It's coming up in the left 11 o'clock. Even though it's a fairly large LZ, you'll see it's still tricky to find LZs out here in the forest, out in the bush. At LZ now, just left 11:30. Obviously there's a couple of tents in there and a vehicle. So I'll reduce our speed down a little bit. We're going to run a left-hand orbit looking at this LZ. So we want to have a look at the power check as well. So that's about 31 all up. So let's just make sure that I've got enough power. And continue around the LZ. And plenty of power for OGE inside the LZ. Alrighty. Power check's good. Size is ample shape, triangular basically, but there's an obvious orientation up this side closest to us. Surface, grass, not a issue. Slope, there's bound to be some because it's going to slope up to the top of the hill. Sun, yeah, the sun could be a factor, so instead of coming straight into the sun, we'll orientate it so we keep the sun on our left hand side and run up the side of the LZ going in here. Surrounds, biggest concern would be the tents in there. Tents don't do well with downwash from helicopters, so we'll try and keep a healthy distance from them. Wind, not a factor today. Wires, I'm not seeing any as we go around, just having a look in to see if we got any glints, no poles or anything like that. Approach will be parallel to where we're facing at the moment, really. If we open up onto a downwind on the far side of the LZ, we'll come back in and terminate in the right hand corner of the far end of the LZ as we look at it at the moment. So terrain is rising up beyond what our final approach is going to be. Turbulence won't be an issue, and takeoff will be a coordinated climb back out towards the downhill direction, opening up onto a downwind. Now, so using the side of the helicopter, identifying a parallel track to come back in the path, and identifying a heading basically north, so we'll come back in basically south, reducing speed now. If we didn't have the doors open, we would slow down to 40 knots to open the doors, clear right, ahead, above and to the left. Now the reason for that is that 50 knots is the speed to open the doors, but 40 knots is the speed limit if you're going to have one door open. So unless you've got two crewmen in the back, like we are lucky enough to have today, then at one point in there you're going to be running up against that one door open limitation. Okay, thaw patterns now, we're 6600, we've got plenty of fuel, T's and P's are in the green, CWS is clear. Going to slot the tail rotor through the gap in the trees. Right now moving to the barrier on the edge of the slope. Just want to maintain level and keep the speed under control. To keep the speed under the control, I'm not interested in what's on the airspeed indicator, I'm interested in the perceived speed over the ground, which should be a nice slow walk. So we're maintaining our height as we come in. Using that slot in the trees to make sure that our tail rotor has even more clearance from the barrier as we start on the way down. Now looking at the far end of the LZ, there's a light spot of grass there, and we'll keep that about 1 fist above the instrument panel. Again, controlling my angle with the collective, but controlling my forward speed over the ground with the attitude of the helicopter. If I want to slow down, I'll raise the attitude slightly. Holding 300 foot per minute rate of descent there at the moment, and heading towards our light green spot on the ground. All the way down to a nice hover height. Now Pinch and Muzz are only going to say something if they're concerned today. We just include them as a crew. But we're all clear off to the right. I'm going to bring the tail to the right, nose left, 90. Now, as a rule, operating in slopes, you don't want to turn your tail towards any high ground. I said there were some ways of assessing slopes. You can see here at the moment, apart from what you could see ordinarily for the slope, if we pause here, you can see the trees will always grow straight up, unless they're in a landslide, of course. But it gives you a method of determining what the slope is for the area you're operating in. Tail is still clear left. And turning to high ground, so just maintaining a nice high hover. At departure from here, we could do a towering takeoff. We do have enough power for that, but there's no point running that kind of risk. It's not required. I say risk because if we lost the engine, we would come straight back down in a crumpling heap. So the way that we would end up departing out of here will be what we call a coordinated climb. Coordinated climb, if you visualize a ramp from here to the top of the trees, we will end up climbing up that ramp outside of the LZ. If we were a lot heavier, we would look at accelerating inside ground effect along the ground, or just above the ground, until we reach a point where we would then transition into a climb at a predetermined airspeed from the pilot operating handbook, or the AFM. So today, just a coordinated climb. A good trick with a coordinated climb is that you start the climb with the collective just a little bit before you start moving forward. So get that upward vector going. And as we go up, Now it's easy to pick out a departure point over the top of the trees. So collector's coming in, our power is plenty, and our goal is to power and angle as required to clear the trees on the nose. All clear right, ahead, above, round to the left, turning left. Okay, so that's the first large LZ, and you see we've done PSWATPs. Do we need to do PSWATPs? You know what, you could go in there without doing them and you would probably get away with it. As you say, all that we're talking about is to what extent you can mitigate the risk based on the role, what you're performing with the helicopter at the time. So if it was helicopter emergency services, for example, then their SOPs are going to determine exactly what they do, right through to military, where you can study the map, but when you go in there now, you're going to get what you're given and accept the risk. Right, the next LZ is on an axis. It's longitudinal. It's down here to the right hand side of the helicopter at the moment. We move forwards a little, taking to the right hand side so that I can see into the LZ, and obviously just trying to stay clear of any of the high obstacles, these higher trees that are around the way. You can just see some of the orange flags down there through that quarter window now. They mark out the LZ for where we're going to end up, which is up this end of the eastern end. The LZ is not tight, but it is tighter, but it's definitely oriented east-west. Power is still good, size is tighter, but it's still fine. Shape is oriented along an axis, which is east-west. Surface is still grass, slope, yeah, you can see we're going downhill here now, even with the helicopter, so we're going to watch that. We will be landing up the eastern end. Sun is a factor, but one that we'll just have to deal with because everything else says we have to go in that direction. We're not going to approach and land downhill with our clearances to try and pull up in an LZ. Surrounds right below us right now, there's a Black Hawk helicopter, so if we had 2 rotor diameters or more above him on the way in, we shouldn't cause him too much grief, but good imagery would dictate we would avoid overflying him, so we've got a couple of options ahead of us now, either straight in along the axis, or we can come in on a dog leg on final and just avoid overflying him directly. Wind's not a factor, wires, not seeing anything in there at the moment. Approach will be parallel to our current bearing inbound. Terrain is again sloping up to our left hand side there towards the east. And we'd be escaping with a left turn here to head off downhill if we had a partial power loss, or extend over the top, get into where the tents are, and pop it down in the larger clearing up there. Takeoff will be a towering climb. Otherwise we'd have to maneuver inside the LZ, which we will do on the second one, but for this one it will be a towering climb, so we'll brief that. So the plan will be to come in along an orientation where we're looking at the moment towards the east to terminate inside the LZ at the eastern end of the clearing. We'll open up now onto a wider circuit orientation, east inbound, yep, so west outbound. Alrighty, open up the circuit. Again, if the doors weren't open yet, we'd be looking at doing that now. We turn on the downwind and crack on with that checks. So we have fuel is sufficient at 320 pounds. 6600 set T's and P's, and CWS is clear. Configuration, doors are back already. I'm not doing anything with the cargo hook. Alright, that's west, clear left, ahead, above, round to the right, and turning right. Come back into west. We are approaching this uphill as well, so we do have to be wary of that. You're approaching rising terrain, so we don't want to drop the nose here and find ourselves surprised when we come out on final. And as usual, the trickiest thing is to try and work out where the LZ is, but there it is laid out beautifully in front of us. Now this one, we're going to hold our height just above this tree that's on our left 1130, and we'll maintain a good high height to avoid giving any downward blast onto that Black Hawk. So So right up at treetop level. My concerns now are 2 trees on the right, and there's a barrier that's just disappearing under my nose, and 1 tree there on the left. Controlling my forward speed now. If I control my forward speed, I can control my angle of descent. I'm happy with the rate. Barrier's just about to pass through the chin bubble on the left hand side. Now I'm starting to pick an aim point over the top of that instrument panel. And I'll move the tail a little bit more to the right. Control the speed, control the angle. So raising the attitude to reduce the speed. Rate of descent is 250 foot per minute. So don't accept anything that's random. If you want 200, set 200. If you want 300, set 300. We're 200 now. And right now, we're all clear on the right. I'm not touching the collective at all. It's just coming down at its own rate. It's coming down to a relatively high hover here, because we've got some high terrain around as well. Now while we're here, have a look around and we can see that there are no overhanging branches or any issues here inside the pad itself, so nothing to cause a problem for us on the way out. The other thing of note, of course, is it is sloped, but that slope is sloping up away from us in that direction out towards our 1 o'clock. So you can do yourself a lot of favors in terms of turning the nose now across to the left, so we'll do that. I know we're clear on the right hand side because I can move the tail rotor and it doesn't go any wider than what the main rotor was doing on the way in. Now if we set ourselves up to land across the slope, using those trees for reference as well, we can set ourselves up to land across the slope, then it's going to give us only 1 problem to deal with when we come up as well with a new load, if we had one. Okay, so now we just hover lower and lower. It will be a slope landing, looking to rest our weight on the uphill skid, and we will maintain the attitude on that uphill skid with the cyclic for as long as we can, as we then lower the lower skid onto the ground. Alrighty, having a good look around again. I can see a tree on that side and another tree on this side. They're the ones that we'd be concerned with, so we'll pick it up. We'll orientate the nose of the aircraft back towards blue there and set ourselves up for a towering departure. Any questions? Set the back. Roger. So cyclic's over. Collective's coming up really, really gently. The goal here is going to be to balance on 1 skid, the right skid. So pulling up with the, there we are, that's on the collective. Just a bit pivoty on the pedals. We'll get the hover attitude going and then lift us straight up off the ground. There we go. Now we'll come back to our reference with blue here in the middle of the pad. That's looking alright. So you can see blue, if you go straight up from his head, you can see a tree as a reference line. So that's the reference line I want to use forwards when we do the towering departure out of here. If we look slightly left, you can see a tree just to the left of the Land Rover. I end up looking just about where the Land Rover is. It means I can track what's going on forwards, and I can track our movement forwards and back as we come up through the LZ. So eyes are front at the moment, and eyes to the left. We're all good. Quick check of what we've got going on with our controls. Fuel is good at 280 pounds, 6600. T's and P's are in the green. CWS is clear. Alright, coming up. Increasing the collective, monitoring the tree forwards, just to keep coming up that line. If I compare the tree against the trees that are in the distance behind it on the far side of that clearing, I can see if I'm moving left or right or not. I can look across to the left, I can see that I'm not moving forwards or back. A little bit of a right drift there, so correct it. And if I needed to, I could stop the climb at any point if the guy spotted something and say no, stop it there, and then I can restart as well, and that should not be a problem. So a nice controlled rate. We're going up at 200 foot per minute. It's about the same rate as we drop down into the LZ. Physically, we could do it a lot faster, of course, but we're not interested in doing that. It's all under control, smooth. Once we're clear of the treetops, see we've got a tree just left and right of the nose that are a little bit higher there. We can transition and move away. Alrighty, so that's LZ2. Left, head above, round to the right. We'll turn around to the right and set up again to come into the same LZ. This time what we're going to do is position ourselves back into the same landing zone, but then we're going to maneuver inside the LZ to get to a third LZ. That third LZ is situated off to the left-hand side of the LZ we just went into. So just to the left of that conifer there now. When we go in there, we actually have a load to pick up as well. So now fuel is sufficient, 6600, T's and P's in the green, CWS is clear, and our cargo switches are clear left, ahead, above, to the right, turning right. Doors are open. So if we look at a load there at the moment, we've got about an extra 15 PSI up our sleeve for power at the moment. And that extra 15 PSI ends up translating into 3,000 pounds of uplift, so approximately 200 pounds for every PSI. That's conservative. That would take us into the bottom of the yellow gauge markings for our temperature on the engine, which we can remain in for up to 30 minutes on the sortie. Okay, so similar to before, I'm going to come in to the LZ, same path as before. Reduce our speed by raising our attitude and holding our angle with the collective. Reduce the speed by raising the attitude and controlling the angle with the collective. As our rate of descent, it's about 150, and closer on the right, so on the left, so moving across to the right, continuing down, raise the attitude, all clear on the right. Down into the LZ. Okay, now we want to maneuver. Remember I said the tail, as in the tail rotor of the helicopter, it juts out from the main rotor disc by 8 feet. So if we allowed, say, a 10-foot margin, then we could rotate that tail rotor all the way around the main disc and not hit anything. How do we use that for maneuvering? Well, we've got an extra 10 feet over to the right there at the moment. Certainly clear on the left, so if I move across here to the right by 10 feet, hold position here, I'm now safe to rotate the nose to the right and tail to the left. So let's do that. This allows us to safely maneuver within the LZ. Once you're at this point, we pause. A couple of options now. The safest one is to turn around the tail and just move the helicopter laterally to the side over the top of that landing zone. And we are going downhill on quite a steep slope, which is why we want to maintain quite a decent height in terms of our hover height. Alrighty. What we want to get into next is going to be a ground con. Tail is all clear. Ground con will be to pick up these barrels. So just take a moment to take in the scenario. We've got a tree left, a tree on the right. We're going to move in and turn our tail to the left, nose to the right, over the top of the barrels, but he's going to give us the con. Okay, go ahead, ground con.
Okay, keep going forwards.
we're not going to say anything, we're just going to listen to him.
Cross to your left, 1 meter. Hold steady. Keep going forwards. 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 Position there. I'm gonna get you to bring your nose to the right, 90. Speed around the mast. We're looking you up now. Can you hold? Shot, take root. Cargo is hooked up. Tank engine. Tank engine.
Okay, now when we come up, we don't want to go barreling straight in and snap the line tight. That sends shock loads through the main rotor system, particularly the pitch control levers. So again, just behind the tree there, you got the sun, so the tree right on the nose will come up there, and looking across to the right, this side, it's forward of the A-pillar, so I'm happy with that.
Tank engine. Tank engine. Tank engine.
Just come up, take the tension on that line. Should be pretty close. It's a 50-foot line, 47 foot now. There we go. Now as we bring in the power, we want to increase the left pedal with the power so we don't rotate the tail coming out of the LZ. And that weight's about 1,000 pounds, and sure enough, it's added about 5 psi to what we have on board. So up and up and up and up. Once we're clear of the LZ plus the 50 feet that we have on, we can go and drop this off. I've got about another 30-40 pounds before we get the 20-minute fuel light on, which is our bingo. Transitioning. More than you bargained for, but we've pulled the weight out. I'm just going to drop this weight off now, and then we'll go into the LZ4. That was LZ3 via a ground con, so a little bit different when we're accessing it from an adjacent LZ. We'll clear right ahead, above, round to the left, now to the left. Establish ourselves on that 3-degree glide path we're talking about. So now we're trying to do a 3-degree glide path as a standard approach plus the 50-foot, thinking what the barrels are doing. So we want to fly the barrels rather than the helicopter. So now looking at the tree directly ahead of us, just beyond the helipad, and we'll aim to be at that tree at about 75 feet, which is probably about 80-90% of the way up. Of course, hopefully the guys will be getting out of the way about this stage. Again, attitude for airspeed. If we want to slow down, just raise the attitude. That's good. Now we can move forwards. Thinking about where the center of the rotor disc is, because that's where the hook is. We'll come in to pop that down next to the container. So just using feel at the moment. I can't see down there, so I've just got to lower it gently, and last couple of feet. Now we'll release the load. When we release the load, we just come down gently, make sure that if the line didn't release, we're not going to snag it at all. We'll clear to the left, so move off to the left and back, where we just come in. And there's our load on the ground ready to be loaded up. Okay, all clear, tail gun to the left, nose to the right. That's 200 pounds, we'll go off and get some fuel. clear right, head, above, left. Okay, out of the refuel now, we're going to go into LZ4. Now LZ4 is a much tighter con. This particular con is going to be performed by the backseat crew of Big Bench and Muzz. So we'll go and do an inspection of the LZ first. Give you an idea of what we're up against. So as a reminder, there's LZ1 on the left. You remember 2 and 3. 4 is nearby as well. $6,600 fuel, T's and P's, and the green CWS is clear. Alright, you can see just in our left 11 o'clock there's a fuel tank down there. That fuel tank is inside the LZ that we're going to go into this time. So there's a couple of ways of doing this in terms of inspection. We're still looking at a PSWATP. The power will still be good, although we're going to be 3 psi less, but we have plenty of power before. When I say 3 psi less because we're 600 pounds heavier. Let's just get set up here, and at the moment I'll view down into that confined area and we'll see what sort of an assessment we can make. So our concern now is to make sure we don't hit anything again, like the tree that's just on the nose there. So without thinking about that too much, let's have a look at this confined area 4. That's it, opening up through the A window there at the moment, behind the pillar. There's the tank. So you'd agree it's somewhat tighter than what we've looked at with other confined areas, and now you're getting into the realms of the kind of confined area that you'll certainly benefit from having a crew with a crewed con. So the orientation for this again is still looking pretty close to east-west. Size, shape, surface, slope, yeah, sun, still a factor. Surrounds, nil. Wind, not a player. Wires, no. Approach will come in approximately 90 degrees to our current, but what we're going to do this time, rather than doing a full circuit, is just swing our tail into the slot further downhill away from us, and then when we're in a hover over the top of the pad, we'll hand over the con, and Pinch and Muzz will guide us down. Okay, terrain, not much we can do about that here at the moment. And turbulence unlikely. Takeoff will be a towering takeoff, of course. And the plan. Alright, I'm going to come around here to the right hand side. My right hand side. Just building up a 3D image of what's here at the moment. So it takes time to do that as well. We've got the large trees up the top end here on my right, and a tree just in the right 1 o'clock. So it's almost like leaping over a fence. We're going to leap over a fence here with our nose coming over 90 degrees to the right. When we get over the top, we'll then hand over the con. Instruments are all good. Okay. So crossing the fence. Again, we're not turning around the mast, so we know that our tail's keeping clear because of the fact that it's tracking behind us. And this is a good position. Hey, Pinch, you have the con.
Understood, I have the con.
Copy.
Okay, continue forward. Continue forward another 15 meters, start coming down. Easy down another 5 meters. Ease down another 3 meters. Another 2. 1. Okay, stand by, steady. No further right. We just move to the left 1 meter. Continue down 10 meters. above the tank. The light will move you back so that you can see the tank. The tail rotor is well clear. We're clear left and behind. Move to the rear 10 meters. Move a further 5 meters to the rear. Tail rotor is well clear. You should have the tank visual now. Roger. Move forwards. You guys are moving into position. Move forwards 3 meters. So yeah, move forwards 4 meters. 3, 2, 1. Stand by steady. They'll key you up. And hook 2. You're all clear. Straight up. No more moving. Rogers. Tail rotor is clear. Continue up. All clear on the left. 1 meter clear on the right. No further right. Continue up. All clear. Now all clear on the right. All clear to the left. All clear behind. Up the trees. Hand load is well clear. Head over the con when you're ready. Well clear.
And transition. I have the con.
You have the con.
Thanks, mate.
Copy. Welcome.
Go and drop this off, and then we'll go and do LZ5. Side of that LZ, heavily sloped LZ, so you get an idea what that looks like as well, one in which you're not going to be able to touch down in. So we can bring up that load. They're going to throw some smoke for us as well on this one. Not a particularly heavy load, this one. Okay, now you're left 10 o'clock, just getting some wisps of red smoke there in the trees, so we'll come back through as a 180. 6600, fuel is sufficient, T's and P's are in the green, CWS is clear, having the base turn. You set in the rear?
All set in the rear.
Roger. Alright, let's just control our approach. We don't want to take too long, but we want to be under control as well. that tree on the nose is going to cause issues for us in the foreground here. Good visual of what's going on. Tail's going to be clear. I'll move forwards to the far side of the LZ. You have the con pinch.
Copy, I have the con.
Roger, move
Continue
forwards.
moving forwards. Moving forwards approximately 30 meters. Continue moving forwards 20 meters. 10 meters. And commence descent. The tail radar is now clear. Another 5 meters. Coming in overhead. Another 5 meters forward. And come down 10 meters. Down. 30. Down. 15. Thanks, Buzz. All clear to the right, and all clear to the left. Down. 10. Down. In position. Shot. Take a look. Cargo is set down. Take attention. Take attention. Okay, you clear to come up. All clear, left and right. Tail radar is clear. Nearest obstacle is on your nose.
Roger, I have the con.
You have the con.
Just bring set green. 9 and 10. Okay, while clear, transitioning. Again, for our approach, different angle this time, but we're interested in having a nice slow walking speed over the ground and maintaining that on the way in. As we get lower, our speed will naturally increase relative to the ground. You'll perceive that. So make small adjustments to the attitude to maintain a slow walking speed over the ground. As you can see, blues back there again. So we'll come in, pop the load in front of the Land Rover. 86 feet on the red out. $72 feet. Got some good visibility here. And we'll lower it here.
And the ground. On the ground. Cargo is unhooked.
And move off to one side. And the load's good. Right, now just before we finish, let's see if we can have a look at a Boggy LZ as well, and the technique that you'd use for that. So go and do that in here. Let's imagine this is a boggy area here. We'll just settle it down.
Clear down and behind on the left.
Clear down and behind, right?
Copy. Right, if this area is boggy, you don't want to just lift straight up. If you do, then one skid will suck, the other one won't, and that whole situation will suck pretty quickly because you'll end up in a dynamic rollover situation. The helicopter will roll right or left and you won't be able to stop it. So what do we do instead? Well, we want to break the suction, and we want to break the suction on both skids. So move the cyclic forwards, and it's almost like we're trying to do a ground run takeoff. So cyclic forwards, collective coming up. Once we've got the weight on the nose, we can move the pedals left and right like that, and right, and you can walk out the boggy situation, breaking the traction. Once you've done that, you can go straight into a takeoff forwards. There we go.
PSWATPs, remember, and keep in the front of your mind that that's about risk mitigation. So to what extent you can conduct the PSWATPs, what time you have available, and how you're going to conduct them will depend on what sort of role you're performing with the helicopter. When you get into the LZ itself, do keep in mind that adrenaline is your enemy. One of the first things that disappears with adrenaline is your peripheral vision. The next thing that disappears is your hand-eye coordination. Both of those are going to be important to you when you're in a confined area. If you watch guys who are doing tactical shooting at a range a few years ago, they started teaching them that when they finish that particular iteration, you'll see them looking left and right before they holster the weapon again. And the specific reason why they're doing that is because it's known that the adrenaline will have given them tunnel vision, they'll lose their peripheral vision, and they need to check for their blind spots before they reholster. And the same thing, the reason you do drills for tactical weapon firing, or in karate and elements of martial arts, are because when the adrenaline kicks in again, you lose that hand-eye coordination. So whilst it is a good challenge to get in and perform confined areas, and obviously a lot easier with Pinch and Muzz sitting in the back here as well, it is important to get in and practice them, get to the point where you can do them in a way that is calm. I mean, you still enjoy it, that's why we all do it. But you've done a great job. I think what we're going to look at next is some shorter flights that are going to look at initially straight up visual approaches to the pad and just controlling that on the way in. We'll look at some slope landings, and then you wanted to have a look at as well the quick stops and over-the-shoulder departures, so we can have a look at those things too. But that'll be the next couple of flights that we take. They'll be shorter than this one for sure. Cheers, mate. Have fun. For those that are watching from elsewhere, have a check down below because you will find links there, especially if you've got DCS. I'll put the BIS files in there. There's links to things like Quizlet that will help you with your checks, and also with those rules of thumb. I've popped those in there as well. So have a look down below. There's lots of good stuff there for you. Cheers. Hope you got something out of it. Have a great day.